Margulis from Atlanta, Georgia. Not exactly around the corner. Karen just wrapped up a terrific 3-day workshop with us. She's an avid daily painter, blogs, and not only teaches workshops, but also teaches online on Patreon. Karen describes herself as a full-time contemporary landscape painter and art educator. We know her as an excellent instructor who makes complex art techniques simple and fun. Karen has exhibited her award-winning work around the world. You may have seen her wildflower and landscape paintings in Pastel Journal, a signature member of the Pastel Society of America, and a Master's Circle recipient of the International Association of Pastel Societies. And there's also a little brochure back there that has her 100-day challenge in it. One of the folks brought it along. So just another FYI.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. And it's been a pleasure sharing with the workshop group. And really, I came away from it on a real high because everyone there inspired me. Right, so I want to get back and paint. So this has never happened where I get to actually do more painting before I get home.
Kathleen, that's terrible.
Once you get home, life happens and it kind of gets a little bit more tricky. So thank you all for coming out. And what I want to do today is invite you all for a walk. And we're going to go for a walk, and we're going to go into a meadow filled with wildflowers and grasses. A tangle of grasses and wildflowers. And we're going to be compelled, hopefully, to walk into the distance and back to the trees and see how far we can go, because those wildflowers, they stretch for miles. We're going to see how far we can walk, head on back, and then we're going to kind of set up a picnic, maybe lay down a picnic blanket and relax and look at those flowers up close and personal and kind of have a different point of view. And we're going to do this through the paintings that I want to share today. So I want to do 2 demos for you today. We're going to do the big picture, the wide open meadow, any kind of grassy field. I'm just going to call it a meadow, but the things that I'm going to be sharing through this demo can be applied to any landscape where you have this kind of grassy field with or without wildflowers. So if wildflowers don't suit you, we all paint landscapes with grasses, and hopefully this will help you. And then for the second demo, we're going to zoom in and get up close and personal with some flowers and have a different point of view. I'm also going to share 2 methods to start a pastel painting. I'm going to do my tried and true no-fail start, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then I'm going to do a watercolor underpainting for the second demo. And so before I get started on that, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of the background of why wildflowers. What is that? Why is that my passion? Why is that something that I really love to paint? And it really wasn't always that way. I was always drawn to them. That was like the thing that, and it's important to notice, what stops you in your tracks? If you're out for a walk or you're scrolling through pictures, what stops you and makes you say, oh, I'd love to paint that? And for me, it was, as my husband would say, the weeds. If something was growing up in a crack in a sidewalk, that, I want to paint that. The more tangled, the weedier, the better for me. And so I always wanted to put these little wildflowers into my paintings. But early on, I was discouraged. And there were, people around me, whatever, friends would say, maybe leave those flowers out. You don't need those. Your paintings are looking a little too sweet. And I thought, ooh, that really doesn't sound like a compliment. Do I want sweet? I don't know. And I thought, well, I probably maybe should leave them out. And I did, right? For years, I ignored that calling. And then finally I said, you know what? I can't resist. I have to paint them. And when I look back, what I realized is when they were saying it was sweet, they were really saying they weren't good. It was more like childlike, right? I'll just share this with you. I know it's hard. Don't worry about what's down here. And by the way, feel free to take photos of anything or any of the things that I'm sharing with you. I'm perfectly fine with that. But this is what they look like. It had issues. I had fences of grass and polka dot flowers. I didn't know how to mask the flowers. I had the greens. I mean, greens can be a struggle with landscape painting, but I had all the wrong greens. I had those crayon box greens. And that's why it looked like a kid did it. And so what I realized is I need to find a way to make my wildflower paintings a little more natural and believable, maybe a little more sophisticated. So over the years, I have learned some tips and techniques and things that have helped me improve my paintings, landscape in general, but then more specifically with the wildflowers. So what I want to do today is take something like this and elevate it and make it feel like those flowers aren't sweet anymore, but they actually can evoke something in my viewer. So that's what I'm going to try to do in the demo.
Hey,
so,
Karen,
yes?
Can you just show the 25 people out here what you showed the room? Sorry to bug you. That's gorgeous. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, so, all right, we're going to start. And what I always thought was starting a painting, especially if I wanted to be expressive. And that was, by the way, what our workshop was about, how to paint with more expression. And I thought, oh, that's easy. We'll just get up there and throw some color at it and make some marks and write. It should be easy. We can just get passionate with the painting. And I realized that doesn't work that way. If I want to be passionate and be intuitive and let go and be expressive with my mark making, I actually really need to begin with a plan. I need to slow down. I need to think about some things. I need to plan it out so I have a map, and then I can let go and paint with passion. And there's another part of that where we need to slow down at the end, and that's something I never used to do either, and we'll get to that. But we need to start with a plan. So what I have is my map approach, and I know these are hard to see and read. That's why if you want to come and take photos of it, but I'm going to go over them. The map approach. I didn't know what to do when making a plan, and I think that's why I avoided it. But once I had a kind of step-by-step idea or method, it really helped. So the word is map. I'm creating a roadmap for my painting. So I need M, I need motivation, I need A, action plan, and P, I need to pre-select my palette before I start. And so M, motivation, what does that mean? You have to know why you're painting something in order to know what to do to get your story across or your message across. Oftentimes we'll pick a photo, and I'm only talking photos here, we'll force subject to paint, and then we don't think about why. And then we wonder why it doesn't have a story, and right? So my goal is to invite the viewer into the painting, attract their attention from across the room, allow them to wander around and participate in the painting. I don't want all the details spelled out. I want there to be enough mystery, but I want to give direction. I want to orchestrate the movement of the eye. And that's what I'm thinking about when I'm making a plan and as I paint. So I got to know why. And I'll just start off by, and I'll show you guys there in just a second. I know this is super hard to see. This is my reference photo. I'll talk about it. But what is my motivation? What is my why? And basically all it is a group of trees in the distance and a big open field with a few scattered flowers. It's not a very good photo. It's small. There's some interesting things happening that will give me the freedom to make it hopefully into a more interesting painting. So I don't like to work with perfect photos or photos that are large where I get caught up in all the detail. I want small kind of photos that have good bones, but will give me freedom to make it better. So this is that kind of photo for me. And so I look at this and I say, what's my motivation? What's my story? Well, it's going to be getting to those nice sunlit flowers in the distance and kind of moving through the shadowed foreground and kind of moving into the flowers. I'm going to call this one Wildflower Walk. And oftentimes I will give a painting a title before I start painting so that I can be reminded of what my story is. All right, so Wildflower Walk. So now I need an action plan. A, what is the action plan? I'm going to do a value-based thumbnail. That's what this is right here. I'm not going to spend time talking about how I go about doing a thumbnail just because that's time consuming. You can find it for free on my blog or through Patreon. We go through this extensively. It is a wonderful way to create the foundation for the painting. I will actually use this to start the painting and I won't even be looking at the photo. So basically, value thumbnail to me is simplifying my photo or my subject into a few simple shapes, assigning those shapes of value anywhere from 2 to 4 values, never more. I try to avoid being too spotty and being too literal with my photo. I want big, simple shapes that if I can connect them, I'll connect them. Think about it this way. We have to have a foundation for our painting, and we're going to build the layers and gradually add the detail. But if we don't have a strong foundation, the details have nothing to hold on to. So that's the way I like to think of it. So my action plan is to do the value thumbnail, which I've already done, and to figure out what kind of underpainting should I use, what kind of paper, what color paper, and what size, what orientation. All of these things will help tell my story better. And if I don't take time to think about that, then I might be struggling and I might be fighting, and I'm not telling my story in the best way. So take time to make a plan, then you can plan to let go. And that's what I like to remind myself. Oh, and then the third thing, P, pre-select my palette. I like to work with a limited palette. I know at home I have a studio box that's big, loaded with pastels. Also have plenty of other boxes. After I've been painting since 2005, so you can imagine we accumulate quite a few pastels, but that's too many. And if I give myself free reign over all of those, access to all of those, I am going to end up with color chaos. So before I start a painting, I limit the palette. And so I either pull out the pastels that I want for the painting and put them in a box lid or a butcher tray, and then work from that rather than saying, oh, I have a whole table full of pastels. The other thing that helps me, why it helps me avoid color chaos, is because it does that. It also allows me to be more intuitive and paint with more passion because I don't have to interrupt my flow of my painting and my passionate phase to find the right color or value. Because every time I break away from the painting and my logical brain, then it ruins the flow, right? So we want to remain in that zone, and by pre-selecting the palette, we can do so. And basically, what I've got is kind of left over from the workshop, but I'm going to try to work from this. This is these are Terry Ledwin pastels. This is a set I put together for them a couple years ago. It's the floral landscape set. And so I like to use this box. It is a limited palette, but I do have a few others that I need to. And that's another thing. I start with a limited palette, but I don't restrict myself from pulling another pastel or 2 or 3 if I need it. But if I find my tray is overflowing, I probably ought to see if I can reuse what I already have rather than reach for yet another one. So that's what I mean by that. So make a map, and then we're going to let go with the painting. So here's this. I think I showed that. Here's the photo and my thumbnail. I'm going to put these over here. All right, so I'm going to take my photo off of this, but I'm not going to put it up on my board yet. I'm not going to look at it, but what I am going to do is look at the value thumbnail. The value thumbnail gives me all the information I need to start the painting. This is the value thumbnail. Put it up here. I'm going to be working today on a piece of 16 by 20 Lux Archival sanded paper, which is painting, the subject and the underpainting technique that I like to use. But I love Lux Archival because I don't have to mount it and it really won't buckle if I get it wet. And I love to really put, I I love to abuse the paper. So it does a good job. But I'm not going to do a wet underpainting right now because I want to show you my no-fail approach to starting a painting. And it's value-based, but it also introduces color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one color, and I'm going to choose 4 values of that color. And that's what I'll use following my map to block in the painting. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to do a drawing, just a light line drawing of my composition that I did from the value thumbnail process. So I've got this kind of tree shape here, I've got a smaller one here, I've got like maybe mountains or distant trees in the background. One thing that I do is I take a lot of liberty with my photos. And I like to say it unless I am painting something, say as a commission, and someone says, this is my view, I want it just like my view, okay, fine. Otherwise, it's fair game. I take out my artistic license, and everyone in the workshop now has an artistic license, physical license. And so it's okay. And it was Degas who said, even in front of nature, one must compose. So if I'm going to move things around and do some shifting around and changing things around, that's okay. So what I've done here is I made a line, and I've made another line going here. Why? I have this big open area. How am I going to get our viewer, those looking at our painting, all the way from the foreground into the distance? I have to find a way to pull the eye through that field. And I'm going to do it with the grasses and the flowers, but I need something underneath. I need what I like to call a foundation pathway, some dark shape that holds all the grass and flowers together. If I don't put it in there, it could be just floating, and there's no spring to it. So that's just to remind me to create the foundation pathway. Notice I don't have grasses, I don't have flowers, I don't have leaves. I don't need any of that because this is just the foundation. So 1 color, 4 values. I love these. I'm just going to share. I'm not using these colors, but I want to share these with you. These are Rembrandt little trial sets, and they are nice range of values. And they're like $6. They were when I bought them. They come in all different colors. These are great for underpainting because I like to use a harder pastel in my underpainting. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. Because it doesn't fill the tooth of the paper as quickly. But I'm not going to use the reds for this painting because I woke up this morning and I was going to paint poppies. And I woke up this morning and I thought, nah, I don't want to paint poppies. I've been inspired by all these yellow flowers. And we've been driving back and forth on the highways, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm feeling the yellow flowers. So why not, right? So I'm going to go for the yellow flowers, and it's going to change my whole thing. I don't know. Sometimes that's good, sometimes not. We'll see how it goes. But what I've done, let's just show you this way. I've selected 4 values of yellow. So what I do is I take a dark, I'm going to do it right on the painting so that you can see it. And I take a light yellow. And now I need to find 2 values that are in between. And a lot of times you just have to test them to see if it's the right ship. Like this one is, oh yeah, that's a little bit lighter, so that'll work. And this should be in between. All right, so those 4 are going to work. And that's how I do it, I test it. So I'm going to block in the darkest dark with this dark brown using a light touch. One of the things that I like to repeat over and over to myself so I remember is the right touch is a light touch. Why? Because the light touch allows me to have more layers. I'm making this darker than my thumbnail, but I will modify it because I really want to have a nice, strong, dark foundation pathway leading up to my trees. Right touch is a light touch, allows me to have more layers. How do I know if it's a right touch? If I can still see the paper underneath, or I can see the color of the pastel of that, the layer underneath, I can still see that color, then I know it's a light enough touch. If, for example, I do something like this, where I can no longer see the color of the paper, but in this case, we'll just use it for the tree trunk. That's too heavy. That's a shouting mark. I want to whisper for as long as I can, and then I'll shout when I know I'm probably not going to go over it too many times, if at all. So I blocked in the darkest darks, the lightest light of the lighter value, and so this middle, this is a middle value, all the flat ground. So let's get that middle value. And we have to cover this up. I'm using horizontal strokes in the distant grasses. And as I come forward, I'm changing the direction of my marks so that I can create a better feeling of depth. These are things that I'll get to, but I want to keep that in mind as I move forward. So now we have our darks, our lights, our middle light, and then we have middle dark. That would be for those distant trees or mountain shapes. I'm not sure what I'll make that yet. And also the foundation pathway, so I'm going to extend it just a little bit more, make it a little bit thicker to vary it a little bit. And I'm also going to take an additional step and create a little bit of color up in the sky, pulling us down to the tree. And the whole idea is then we can move all the way through the painting from the ground all the way up to the sky. Once I have that down, I'm working on Lux Archival sanded paper. I could easily do this as an alcohol wash and get some cool drips, right? Or I could do water wash. But for the sake of time for a demo, I'm going to show you my go-to method when I don't have time for like plein air painting and I don't have the supplies with me. I'm going to do a dry wash. I'm using a piece of pipe insulation foam, and I'm going to, this is the noisy part, but I'm going to rub it all in. I'm rubbing it all in for two main reasons. The main first reason is, do you see all the light bits of paper peeking through? That's a distraction for me, unless I was painting snow. And so what ends up happening if I don't cover it all up, and this happens on any light value paper, yellow or UART, where the very light areas peek through, I have to add pastel, right, to cover it up. And the more pastel that I add, the more chance I have of creating mud. So if I can cover up all those light bits early on in the underpainting phase, right, then I'm not fighting. And I can then have potentially less layers, but a less chance of making mud. So I'm blending it all in, which is pipe insulation. I go from dark to light, but really you can just move it around a little bit to get a clean edge. You can wash these. I have a friend who puts them in the washing machine. But it's a good tool, but I will say this. I don't use it as an eraser, and I'll never take it out again in the painting process. Like, I'm done with it. Because if I try to use it in the painting process, it can physically blend layers together, and that's what can cause mud. When we want mud, I call it beautiful Technicolor gray. When we don't want it, it's mud. But when we physically blend the layers together, that creates mud. So I want to be able to optically blend layers using a light touch. So I don't have to cover up the light bits anymore, but I don't want to use it anymore as I don't want to create mud. And it won't erase. So I don't use it anymore. I got a little bit of texture going on. I was very aggressive with this. Usually, have a really soft touch with it. But anyways, it's fine. The other reason why I blend it all in is because now what do I have? I have a foundation for my painting. Everything is soft and out of focus, but I have a strong bounding map to follow. And because it's out of focus, I now can take control over where I want to put the focus. I don't have to have every blade of grass or every leaf on the tree. I can decide where I want the viewer to go, and that's where I'm going to add the flare clarity in the details, but it's going to come through a layering process from big, simple shapes down to smaller, finer detail. Now I take out my small filmy photo and I start. Any questions so far before I go any further? Where do you get any hardware store? Home Depot, and it comes in like long pieces, and you just cut them or tear them. Yeah, and I like it because it's dense and it typically doesn't shred. Okay, so now I gotta turn this around. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce all of the dark areas, reinforce the dark areas. And so what I'm going to do is take a dark value pastel using a light touch and start reinforcing all of those dark shapes. This is a dark blue. It doesn't really matter what dark value you use because I'm not worried about the local color yet. My goal is to build up several layers of, I'm actually going to add another little bush right here just so I don't have a straight line. I'm going to use several colors that are the same or very close in value as I'm building up the layers. And then eventually I will get to the local colors. So in other words, that tree shape here and this bush, those are green. The grasses are green, right? And I will eventually get to the green. But I want to build up colors so that the green will be more interesting when I get to it. Sure, I could make the tree just green and just values of green, and it would look like a tree. But I want to create what I call fine wine rather than cheap wine. Yeah. This is not just one grape, it's a complex blend that will be much more enjoyable to look at or to taste. Do you have a question?
Are you now using softer pastels?
Oh yeah, now I'm using the Terry Ludwig softer pastels. I'll talk more about that in just a second. But what I'm doing with this idea of creating a fine wine is I'm layering very lightly the right touch is a light touch, another dark value. This happens to be a dark burgundy. Really doesn't matter what I pick. I just want a nice rich dark. How do I know it's a light enough touch? Because, let's try purple. Because I can still see the colors underneath. If I press too hard, I lose that. Now I am going to have to make adjustments as the painting goes on to help create a better or more believable feeling of depth. I have what I call the 3 keys to a stronger landscape painting, which I'll get into. But one of the things is I want to create a visual journey for our viewer. So we talked a little bit about that, and I'll talk more about that. I want to create a believable feeling of depth, and I want to create an earth-sky connection, and I'll address all of those things. I can go one more layer with a red violet, but I think at this point I have a fine enough wine that I can go ahead and add some of the local color, which is the green. At this point, though, because I'm moving away from the photo and I've taken out my artistic license, I don't really want to get lost. I want to be consistent, and I don't want to get lost in this process. So I have to make a decision as to where my sunlight is coming from. One thing that I did enjoy about this particular photo was the foreground was very much in shadow, and then there was sunlight in the distance. So I want to keep that in mind, but I need to know where the sun is coming from so I can be consistent with any light and shadow. So I'm going to have the sun come from over here. So I'm going to put up this little button. That's my sun button. And the sun button keeps me consistent. So when I'm making changes, I don't get lost or confused. So there's my sun button. So the sunlight will be hitting the left side of those trees. A little bit of, and when I'm adding the light, to the tree shapes and the bushes. I'm doing it gradually. So in other words, I'm not making a very quick jump to the lightest or the warmest color that I see. Instead, I want to gradually increase the light. And I'm not going to go any further at this point, but I will make them feel like they have more sunlight. Once I've reinforced the darks, the next thing I'm going to do is, by the way, I have 7 steps to the wildflower meadow. You can see here. So what have we done? We made the plan. We're blocked in already, the underpainting. I'm putting in the dirt, which is all this dark stuff. I'm going to add more color to the this other area after I turn on the lights. Turn on the lights, what is that? Well, I'm going to paint the sky right now. I want to paint the sky early on in the painting because it sets the whole mood, the whole tone, lets us know what kind of day it is, lets us know where the light is coming from. And I don't want to wait till the end of the painting to throw in the sky. Should never be an afterthought because it is so integral to the painting. So, sky, it's a blue sky day. I don't want too much going on up there, but I do need to know how far down I want to put it. So I've got to make a decision about the distant stuff. Do I want that to be mountains or do I want it to be distant trees? And because I have an artistic license, I can make a decision. And if I'm not sure, sometimes I'll just figure out, let's try both. You know, so I know I need a lighter, duller, cooler color. So let's just make it distant trees with this nice grayed down blue in the distance. And I really like whenever I can make layers. So I want to poke it into this big tree here just a little bit. Get some layers going. So the more layers I have, the better feeling of depth that I can get. I'm going to add a nice grayed down green. That's one lesson that I learned that my paintings were lacking, and that was that I didn't have the right greens. I had all spicy greens, those bright, intense, pure colors. And those were great, but I needed a balance of the earthy greens and the earthy colors, the colors that are neutral. So I just layered another color on that. If I want a little variation, I'll add a lighter value. And by the way, this is the set that I selected. I tested them pretty extensively when I made my selections, and I painted probably 100 paintings with them to make sure that they would allow me to do what I want to do with a landscape. All right, so now that I know how far down my trees are going to go, let's go ahead and hop in the sky. And I'm going to do what I like to call an energetic sky. And that is when I make some marks. I gotta get a drink of water. And I make some marks and I just leave them alone. So I'm making some shouting marks with blue. Shouting marks, you see I'm just pressing this, move over a little bit. I'm just taking a darker blue, which is a little too dark, but I'm modifying it with a little bit of a lighter value, pulling that into the tree and creating the start of some sky holes so that I can have a more interesting silhouette on that tree shape. It started out kind of a blob. I like to start with a blob. I'm shouting a little too hard. I like to start with a blob and then modify those blobs. So big, simple shapes, and then I modify it. Now I'm adding a little bit of a lighter, warmer blue and pulling it down to the horizon. And I know that I want to have an earth-sky connection. And so what does that mean? I want what's happening up here to relate to what's going to happen down here. So I made marks in a direction so it helps pull the eye down into the painting. But I also know that oftentimes there's this warm glow at the horizon. I want to put that in. I want to put a lighter value in. But I know I'm going to have a lot of yellow flowers. So I'm going to poke in a pale yellow for my glow. And hopefully that pale yellow will have a better conversation with the yellows that are going to be down here. All right, so now I've got my darks reinforced, my sky in, my distance stuff started, and I'm gonna refine all this, but I've got to do what's on my list, enrich the dirt. So that means I'm gonna add some color to this ground. Also, I'm keeping in mind that I wanna have some yellow flowers, but I don't want polka dots, and I don't want fences of grass. So how am I going to avoid that? Well, I need to put some color down on the ground, which is the dirt color. So I'm going to pick warm colors because this is a sunny day, and I'm going to use horizontal strokes in the distant areas and see how I'm trying to poke these colors around all of my little tree and bush shapes so that I have a variety. It's not just all on a straight line. Any kind of warm, actually going to pull it right over my foundational pathway. It's great to have the foundational pathway, but I don't want it just to be this big dark blob. I need to start to, I don't know where it's loose. Might be on the back. Thing. I know, what was I saying? I know it's gonna be green. So I want colors. Oh, I was talking about the foundation pathway. I don't want it to be this just blob of dark. So I'm gonna start to cover it up, but it needs to be there because as I cover it up, it's with a warmer dark right about here. It's going to be under there, holding everything together. But on the other hand, it's not going to be obvious. It's going to be subtle. At least that's the goal. Make it subtle. So I'm just putting down the dirt. All these colors. I think I'm going to put a little purple in there too. Because if we can incorporate some purple, some violet, and some warm colors, so these oranges, I'm going to do some yellows in just a minute, then all of that will play so nicely underneath the green stuff so that it is more lively. It will look more sunlit. All right, so let's see. We still need some dirt down here, but we have some flower. We have these yellow flowers and they go all the way back here. So I'm going to put in some dull yellow ochre in kind of broad strokes so that I can get the feeling of masses of flowers in the distance. I'm going to put some down here as well. And then let's just fill in with the rest of the dirt. I'll just cover up some of that in there. Now, once I have the dirt in place, colorful dirt, I'm going to now come back and all right, I'm on number 6, grow the grass, paint the green or brown stuff. So if it were fall, it would be gold and grass. Okay, green stuff. So let's add some light to our trees in the background, and I'm going to work my way from the background to the foreground, which will allow me to keep the idea of I need to create depth. So I park back there, work my way forward. I can keep that in mind, that's my goal. So let's add a little bit of sunlight to our tree shapes. We used that one already, it looks like. So let's kick it up a notch, making it a little bit more of a slightly lighter value, but a warmer color. So a little bit of a warmer yellow-green, only on the areas that are getting sunlight. If I put it everywhere, then it flattens it out. I also probably need to put in a few indications of some trunks. I put them in initially and then they went away. So I'm going to reestablish some of the trunks because that will also help me decide where the sky holes are going to go as I go further. Let's see, let's get a little bit more light on it, but I'm just doing it gradually. I don't want to jump too soon into something too much of a lighter value because again, it will flatten everything out. This guy here is in the it's in the front. I can still use this warm green, but this guy here is behind, so it can't be quite as warm. So I'm gonna just use a little bit of a slightly cooler green, just so that they're not all on the same plane. Once I have that in place, now I'm going to work at putting down the grass, keeping in mind that I still want the yellow. Also, I see that there's that sunlit area there. And so what I need to do though, is put in green stuff, but it's going to be lighter and duller. I can still make it warm. I've got some warm, dull colors, but they definitely have to be lighter than what I'm going to put in the foreground. And what I'm doing in these distant areas is I'm putting in these greens using horizontal bands, narrow horizontal bands, because we are looking at the tops of the grasses and the flowers in the distance. We don't see the front where they're growing, but as we come forward, my bands are going to increase in width. They're going to get wider. And eventually I'm going to change the direction of my marks so that we see the front of the grasses. So these are just the distant grasses. And also I'm not afraid to let some of those underpainting colors peek through. So some of those dirt colors that I put in, I'm actually fine with leaving a lot of that in place. I'm pulling over some nice dark, cool green, so my foreground area, because if I want all this stuff to feel warmer, I've got to make this feel like it's more in the shadows. So that's what I'm working on here. And I also want to start thinking about how am I going to get some texture in some of these grasses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is 70% rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, and I'm going to spray this foreground area lightly. If I spray too much of it, it's going to liquefy the pastel and drip, which is also cool, but then we'd have to wait for it to dry. I'm also going to spray my trees. What is this going to do? It's going to darken. You can see it's already done that. Darken those darks. But when I go back over it with another layer, I'm going to get a very subtle texture. I used to use Blair low odor fixative, which is no longer being made. And as a fixative, it was terrible. It darkened the colors, it dulled the colors, it made texture, and you wouldn't want that, except for I wanted that, because that's what it was part of my technique. So I've had to kind of readjust. There's great workable fixatives out there, but they don't do the same thing. They fix, they do a great job, but they don't make things dark and dull and ugly and textural, which is what I'm trying to do. So this works. It doesn't work as well. So I sometimes have to do it multiple times, but it will work. So what do I mean? What is it going to do? Well, when I come over it, that's not the right one, but when I come over it with another green, for example, you can kind of see that it skips over that darkened area and allows the darker bits and pieces to come through. And that gives a little more depth to my grassy areas. So I'm just changing the direction of my strokes right now to be more of an up and down, because now we're going to start to see these grasses. All right, now we have to come in and we have to reestablish the masses of the yellow flowers. I'm going to come in and make some lighter masses in here. Now yellow is tricky because it's a warm color. So how am I going to get that warm color to sit in that background and not come forward? I'm going to use a lighter and duller yellow. And I'm going to save my more intense yellows for the foreground. But I'm also going to have no detail. So lighter, duller, fuzzier will help me create a better feeling of depth and will allow those yellow flowers to sit in the background a little bit better. As I come forward, I'm still creating some masses, but I'm going to take within the masses, I'm going to pull out some individual flowers so that we can, pull that down, because remember we want that pathway leading us into the distance. But I'm going to start to add some brighter, more intense yellows. I'm not painting any single flowers yet. Keeping the masses simple for as long as I can. Then I'm going to give it another spray so that I can get a few more layers on here, because then I'm going to start to pull out some of the individual flowers. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm just come over to the edge. I don't feel like I always want to have everything covered or finished all around the edges. But I don't want to leave any of that really light area either. So that is something that I want to work towards. We're going to let that dry just a little bit more. Let's give a little bit more sunlight to our tree shade. And this guy right in here. And then we have to start to block in the flowers. And this is when I usually turn to an even softer pastel. So this is when I'm going to take out Sennelier. I like the Sennelier half sticks, and I really like the Sennelier half stick Paris collection. And to me, those are perfect for spices. And my goal for this whole, when I'm painting, is to keep things simple for as long as I can. So I use hard pastel typically to start, keeping nice thin layers. And then as the painting progresses, I work with the soft pastel. But at the end, I like to have really nice thick layers where I'm making some nice shouting marks. So I'm taking the Sennelier and really just shouting. But as I go back into the distance, I want to make sure that these are smaller, right, and less distinct. But in the foreground, we can start to spell out a few. What do they really look like? So we'll make some shouting marks in here. We still don't have any grasses, right? We still don't have detail in any of the individual flowers. I'm adding some of this really bright limey green back in here because it really was pretty sunlit, but I want to avoid polka dots, right? That was my goal. So once I have a start of some of those flowers, then the next thing that I'm going to do is step away. And when I said before, this is the part of the painting that I didn't like the plan and I didn't like to slow down the painting. What I discovered is if I took time at the end of the painting to slow down and back up, and I took out a punch list, and I used this punch list to help me evaluate the painting and to try to decide what exactly I need to do. So what am I going to do? I'm going to ask myself, is there a visual journey for the viewer? Where is the eye going? Right. If it's going where I want it to go, fine. If not, what can I do to enhance that visual journey? Is there a believable feeling of depth? So is that happening where I feel like I'm going into the distance? If not, what can I do to enhance that? Is there the earth-sky connection that I talked about earlier? If I had put a pink sky up here, it might clash with all the yellow. So having a pale yellow makes more color harmony and a better visual connection. So it's a slight change like that could make a huge difference in your painting. And then is there anything that's distracting or taking the viewer's eye out of the painting? So a lot of times we have roads and rivers and pathways. If they take us out of the painting too quickly, then that defeats the purpose. Or the road should always lead to where there's something to see. That was Robert Conrad who said that. So I always think about that. If I have a pathway, where does it take me? Is there something interesting? Maybe a spot of color, maybe an interesting mark at the end of the pathway. You want to avoid worms. So any dark or light hard edge shape that go across your painting creates a fence or a visual barrier, and you can't get past that. So I'm looking for that. Frowning mountains. So if I had let's make this a mountain just so that we can see what I mean. Instead of it being the sky, let's see if we can't turn it into a mountain shape. So I'm gonna just go over all of this tree, because remember, I wasn't sure what I wanted anyways, and make a nice mountain. But if my mountain frowned at the end of the paper, at the edge, it takes the eye out of the paper, out of your painting. On the other hand, if we make that mountain smile, it keeps us right in the painting. It holds us in. A lot of times we're looking at a reference photo and we have a steep drop going out of our painting. Could be a tree, but a mountain especially. So if we can take out our artistic license and say, okay, I gotta change that and make sure that the eye is coming into the painting rather than pulling the eye out. So that's just something simple to look for. But anyways, I do this, but I do one thing further. I take out a dry erase board and I make a checklist. And I actually physically write down what I need to do to fix the painting. And I then tackle that list one by one. It keeps me laser focused on what I need to do. And it prevents me from overworking interesting areas, say that maybe I don't want to cover all the way up. If I don't write it down, I'll get back to the painting after I take a break and I will just go at it. And I'll get lost in it again. Before I know it, I've overworked the painting. But keeping that checklist allows me to be laser focused so that I can make a decision as to what exactly I need to do. And a checklist, like a punch list. And once I started doing that, it made a huge difference in my paintings and the results because I was more thoughtful about those finishing works. And when do you know when to stop and slow down? About when you start getting to your detail. So I started very simply and I'm gradually building the layers and the detail and I'm to the point where I need to finesse the details, but I want to know where. I don't want to just go at it and I don't want to overwork it. So the idea, there's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but don't torture a thief who's already confessed. How many times is that? Feed it. But if you step away from it and you make your checklist, you can, again, stay laser focused on what you need to do. Let me show you one more thing on this one. Then we will take a break. I'll answer questions and then I'll swap and we'll do another one. But I wanted to talk about painting grasses because this is one area where I struggled with because I had this. My grasses look like that. And I wanted grasses that look natural and believable. So the way I have come about doing it is instead of this, I'm using a hard pastel with the sharper edge. I make broken lines. So I press and release, press and release. So I have a broken line that kind of dances across the paper. I also try not to be too stiff, too upright, right? So I let those marks dance. You really have to relax and kind of let it happen. If you're really, what's the word I'm looking for, focused on getting it right, then chances are they're going to look stiff. Loosen up and play with it. Practice on scrap paper before you go in there and get to what's the word I'm looking for? Don't get too involved with it unless you practice first and get some of those nice broken lines. And think about where you're putting the grasses. They are linear marks and they will help create that visual pathway. So I'm thinking pulling the viewer in from the edges. And that's where I'm going to put some grasses. When I'm in the stage where I'm painting grasses, what I like to do is put in a few and then step back. Put in a few more and then step back. If I don't step back before I know it, I've got that fence of grass and I've got more than I need. And it's important to stay on top of the painting at this stage so that you can keep things simple and not have things look overworked. Another thing about yellows are tricky. So sometimes to really get yellows to stand out, let's pick a few stars. I'm going to alternate a little bit of a warm and a cool yellow together. You see what happened? Those now are standing out because it's that contrast between that warm and cool. And that's one thing that I didn't get into, but how do we create that visual journey for our viewer? It's not always by things, but it's oftentimes by creating stepping stones using contrast. Areas of contrast are going to attract the eye. A dark against a light, a warm against a cool, a hard edge against a soft, fuzzy edge. So you're going to put the areas of contrast where you want to make sure the viewer is looking. If I have an area of contrast, so like a nice hard edge thing over here, what happens? Boom, your eye goes right there. So you have to stay in control and make sure that you have in your, wrong color. You have your areas of contrast where you want your viewer to look. And so stepping back at this stage frequently will allow you to stay in control over where you put that contrast. And I'm going to just add just a touch of some tiny guys in the background, just so that you know, oh, that's what that is. The other thing that we can do is we can pull out some of our underpainting colors and put them in those upper layers. So I put some of those purples in there in the early layers. It might be interesting to pull some purples back out and put a little purple in here just to add some interest. So these are just kind of the things that I like to do at the end stage of a painting. But again, stepping back, making that punch list has been really the game changer for me when it comes to having a stronger finish. So I think I'm going to stop on this one, and then we'll switch gears and we'll get up close and personal. Does anybody have any questions before we take a break? Yes.
I was really interested by your spray. And you've done it like multiple times?
Yes.
To create more texture. I mean, I use it just initially.
Okay.
I never thought of doing it, but you've done it overall.
I would do it even more. And
Could you repeat the question, Karen?
And then I do like if I let it drip, right? You know, so really spray it so it drips. The other thing I like to do is take a bamboo skewer. Oops, where'd you go? And use it as a tool to create grasses. Look what's happening now. I can drag through that wet pastel. And I'm digging down into the underpainting colors and break up this mass a little bit, because I've got enough layers now where I can kind of get some interesting things happening. Maybe we can let that dry and go over it, and we'll have even more texture, because you've got ridges where you've dug through the wet pastel. Once it's dry, then those ridges will come through like a stay up like an infant. Yeah.
So what is the proportion of alcohol again?
Oh, it's just right from the bottle. 70%. Yeah.
And what is your sprayer?
This is an Amazon continuous spray. So notice when I spray it, it's just nice continuous spray. Yeah. Just look up continuous spray bottle on Amazon. Yeah, I'm getting to like the alcohol. Yeah. So.
Yeah. The alcohol, 70% alcohol.
Oh no! Any Target, any regular isopropyl alcohol. You can use 90%. I like 70%. Because 90% higher flash point. Yes. What was the paper? It's called Lux Archival. It only comes in white. But you'll notice on my next demo, I'm going to use it as well. It will not buckle, no matter how wet it is. Another thing I like to do in a painting like this is come at it with some clear gesso, and we'll kind of liquefy everything and make it muddy with that need our dirt. And then I'll drag this stick through it, let it dry, and get a lot of texture. So it's like play with texture before. Yeah, I mean, they're before, like in the middle stages.
How do you put gesso on with the continuous sprayer?
No, just a brush it on. But you're gonna liquefy the pastel, so it's gonna turn all muddy. So oftentimes I'll do it before I get to the finish. Yeah. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do a wet underpainting and then do clear gesso. It's clear, it'll dry clear, and the underpainting will come through. All right, I'm gonna get started. Just for the timing of the meeting, I wanted to share with you another way of starting a poem that I like to do. So first one I shared was what I call a no-fail start. So the one color, four values. I'm sorry.
No, I
Sometimes though, and that is what I would consider a utilitarian start, right? It just, you get values in, you get a little start to color. And sometimes I just want to let go and be more playful with the way I start a painting. And there's no better way to be more expressive and to loosen up if you want to do that in your work than it is when you start with a wet underpainting that you release some of that control. Because once we let go, then we have to respond to whatever happens. So one of my favorite ways is like oil stain underpainting, where we use oil paint and we get it, use turpenoid and get it nice and drippy. Any kind of alcohol wash where we kind of lose a little bit of control. But watercolor, to me, gives me the most playful approach to an underpainting. And I find it works really well for when I'm getting up close and personal with those wildflowers. And that's what I'd like to show you for this afternoon. So we're going to go into that meadow. This time we do have poppies in the meadow, and we're going to examine what they look like once we're up close and personal, looking up through them. So I have my photo up here and my very simplified value thumbnail where I have, oh yeah, so these are the dark trees, this is the foundation pathway, this is the dirt, and then these are the larger flowers. I have what I call, when I'm painting flowers and clouds, something that I like to call the 1-inch rule. And that is, if what I'm painting is going to be larger than an inch, so flowers or clouds larger than an inch or thicker than a thin cloud, then I leave room for it on the painting. On the other hand, if it's going to be smaller than an inch, then I know that I can easily put the pastel on top and I don't have to leave room for it. And it works really well if we're thinking about clouds as well. Larger than an inch, I'm going to leave room for it. If it's smaller than an inch, I know I can put it on top of all the background stuff. So I'm just kind of designing the painting here by having these distant dark tree masses, and then these flowers are going to be larger than an inch. I don't necessarily like the way they're arranged in the photo. They're kind of lined up. So in front of nature, we must compose. I'm going to rearrange them so that they kind of help lead our viewer around the painting. Then I know this area here is going to be my foundation pathway. And you might be thinking, why are you putting a pathway? You're really up close to those flowers. I need something to hold them together. That's why I like to say the dirt, but it's really just a dark shape to hold the flowers so that they're just not going to float away. So I'm going to put that in on the underpainting. I'm using, again, Lux Archival. As I said before, I like that I can wet it and not mount it, not have to mount the paper and it won't buckle when I get it too wet. For my watercolors, I don't want to use the least expensive, but I don't need to use the most expensive. So I'm going to use today, these are Cretacolor Aqua Bricks. So this was about $25 so for this set. And it gives really nice, rich color. And that's what I'm going to be after. I have, using a stiff bristle brush, this is a Princeton's children's paintbrush. I like a stiff brush because when I do an underpainting, I want to scrub in the color. If you use a soft brush, I don't have it up here, you get a totally different effect when you do any kind of wet underpainting. So I would encourage you to experiment with different brush types when you do wet underpaintings so that you can see the various results. And some will work better for, you know, you might want a smooth brush for water and a scrubby brush for trees, and that's good like that. So, okay, examine that. I never had success with watercolor underpaintings, and that's why I pretty much avoided them. But I have learned some tips and techniques that have helped me have watercolor underpaintings that actually work. I'm going to explain what I'm doing in just a second, but that actually make for stronger underpaintings. What used to happen is I would end up with a very wishy-washy kind of pale, why did I waste my time? There's nothing to this underpainting with watercolor. And what I learned was I need to make sure that my dark shapes are dark enough, because value is truly the key to having a successful underpainting, where you can allow the underpainting colors to peek through. And I want to talk about that for just a second while I do this. What am I doing now? I am painting in that dark foundation shape, and I'm mixing red and blue together, letting them be sometimes more red, sometimes more blue. So I have a little bit of variation, and I'm scrubbing the paint on. It's not too wet and drippy yet. I do like wet and drippy things, but I'm trying to control the amount of liquid, but I don't want to put it on too thick. So how do I know if it's too thick? If I see the ridges in the paint, it's too thick, like the brush marks. And you can use this test for any wet medium that you use for an underpainting. So if you use acrylic, if you use ink, if you use oil, anything goes. But if it's too thick, you won't get as many pastel layers on top, if any. So how do I know? Make sure you don't see those brush strokes. So like the consistency of tea. As this painting will progress, I am going to gradually let things drip a little bit more. But in this early stage, I'm trying to control the drips so that I can have this really nice dark base. And I'm just mixing these colors together. Basically, I'm creating the fine wine that I did in the other painting. This time it's with the watercolor. I really like to scrub it in there. But here's what I was doing wrong, or why I ended up with just a blob of white nothing. I kept going. So I made this nice big dark shape. And by the way, make it as dark as you possibly can, because if you have to correct the dark value with pastel, you're going to want to compensate, and you add more pastel everywhere. Before you know it, you've covered up your entire underpainting. Yeah, that's not the end of the world, but maybe you wanted to preserve some really interesting things. So you have to make sure the darks are dark enough. And I'll just address this one thing before I move on about adding pastel. If you want it to be considered a pastel painting and not mixed media, it has to be 80%, at least 80% coverage of pastel on the entire surface. So I don't ever want to risk it. So I want to make sure I have 100% coverage of pastel. So that means if there's a color or a value that I like, I'll just whisper the same color or value of pastel right in that area. So the watercolor will be doing most of the work, but it will still be officially considered a pastel. So I don't want to mess with that. It works that way. Okay, so what was I doing wrong? I kept going. And then those of you who do watercolor know that as soon as I put something here, it's going to bleed into the next area when they're both wet, and it takes out the darks, right? So I didn't know any better, but I got some great advice, and they said, let that dark dry and then move on. Don't go right next to it with another, don't keep painting. Let the dark dry. Now you might be saying, so I gotta have patience. Well, I'm saying I have to have patience. I don't have patience. But I've learned to have patience on this process. So you might be saying, well, Karen, don't you know, you just take out the hair dryer and you can blow it, it'll be dry. But here's the thing, if you do that, you arrest any of the cool drips and things that are happening as it dries. I don't want to do that because as it dries, I can see that there's some interesting drips. Look, here's one right here. You know what I mean? I can look. If I took out the hair dryer, that would freeze it, and I wouldn't get that. So I don't do that. I have to just have patience. So what do I do instead? I work on other areas. These are dark shapes, so I can probably go up and start on those. I'm going to make those kind of a dark blue-green. Also, speaking of underpaintings, I am not afraid to go darker and more intense in my underpainting than I might want to end up. Darker and more intense in my underpainting that I might want to end up. And the reason being is I know that I can always modify. I can lighten the darks. I can dull down the intense color if it's too much. But it's really hard to get the darks back in. And so if I have them underneath, well, allowing some of those to peek through my pastel layers, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's cheating, but sometimes it feels like cheating because it's like there, and then we are just kind of enhancing it. Which leads me to another thought about underpaintings, any kind of underpainting. Take your time with it. I mean, I'm going a little bit fast here for the sake of the timing of our meeting, but I would take a long time to really paint. You have a brush in your hand, even if you're doing an alcohol wash with pastel and you've got a liquid, take time with your brush to actually paint. Think about the brush strokes that you make and how they might interact with the pastel that's going to be coming. There's another dark shape over here I can put in. And as I'm doing this, it's starting to set up and dry a little bit more. So I think what I need to do is to come in here and put in some of that dirt color. So just like with the other painting, I need to put in some dirt color because it's green, but if I don't have anything interesting underneath the green, then I am not maximizing my color in this painting. And I'm not allowing the greens to really be lively. So I'm coming in with some oranges and kind of a rusty brown. These are good dirt colors. Putting down some horizontal bands in the distance. I'm allowing it to kind of mix in with our pathway here. And now I'm getting a little bit more liberal with liquid, water. With watercolor, the more water you add, of course, the lighter it's going to dry. So I want to keep that in mind and make sure that I have, it's not too watery because I want it to be as rich as I possibly can get it. And at this point, I am going to encourage some of those drips to happen. This is not quite dry, so I don't want to go over it yet. So what I'm going to do, I think, is address the poppies. And I am going to go right in with the local color this time. That's going to give me a nice strong base to build those flowers. But for the most part, I pretty much stay away from local color until the end of the painting. Once I have several layers down. I can get some stems going on. Oh, there comes a stem. There's another stem. Put another guy right in here. Now, what are we going to do with the sky? It's overexposed in the photo, so that gives me freedom. You know, it gives me a lot of freedom. Is it a blue sky day? Well, if I want to make those flowers look like they're really glowing with sunlight, it really feels like they are, and there's nice warm light on the grasses. So probably the sky is a sunny blue sky day. So let's do that. And this is one instance where I might actually go with the local color, or I might go with, say, a pale orange. And then that, when it dries, will give me the option of having maybe a warm sky or maybe going blue sky. My brush is disintegrating into the with the paper, but because I've used it for the workshops as well. But I like that because it's texture. I don't really have a problem with that. I want this to be lighter. Now it is definitely going to take away these darks because those darks are not dry enough, but this will be a learning experience so that you can see that happen in real time, which is why you want to slow down and have patience and see what's happening. Partly it could be interesting, but partly it could be frustrating. So pick. So then what I do while it's starting to dry is I oftentimes will play around with it some more and come in with a wet brush and kind of dig through it and kind of get some interesting grasses and maybe some stems. And at various stages of the drying time process, you'll get various results. Let's pull a few in. So, right, we want to pull the viewer's eye into the painting. The other thing that I might do sometimes, I'll take out this bamboo skewer, dig through it. It kind of picks up some paint and kind of creates some texture. Sometimes it even indents your paper so that you get texture when you come over it with pastel. The other thing that I'll do is I'll take my spray bottle of alcohol. Look at the cool things that happen with that. And again, you'll get different things at various stages of the drying time. But taking your time with this process is what's going to give you the most interesting results. You'll get this bead that gathers at the bottom. You're going to want to get rid of that. Now, I'm not going to make you sit and wait until this thing dries. So I'm going along with the idea of having something already in the oven. So we have one here. Well, I didn't put the centers in. I obviously put the centers in the flowers on this guy. But here we have another one that's ready to go. And did a couple things that I didn't do. I added the taller flower in here, and I added the darker centers. But other than that, it's pretty close. So now I'm ready to address this painting with pastel, and I'm going to actually take the very same approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce the dark areas. Always. If I know that that's the next step, I'm never lost. So reinforce the dark areas, that's going to be this area here. But once again, I don't want to cover it up the underpainting with a very thick layer of pastel. So I am going to whisper. Oh, I need my photo. Let me grab my photo. I'm going to whisper my pastel marks so that I can preserve a lot of that underpaint. Okay. Whisper. Let those underpainting colors do their work. Reinforce those dark areas with basically two dark areas here. We've got that foundation pathway, and then we have these dark green shades. We got some really interesting things happen with this watercolor underpaint. There we go. Reinforce my darks. And I don't want just one color dark. I want more than one color, so I'm going to do another layer of dark. Okay. And now I'm going to just stick with, now let's go with 3 again. I'm going to add a little more purple. Because I know I'm going to have some purple in this painting, so having some purple back in the trees and in this dirt in here will help everything feel connected. So now once I have reinforced those darks, I can start to add some of the darker greens that are actually present in the trees. But I also want to keep a light touch. There's no reason why the watercolor can't do a fair share of work. There's some green working down in here and a light touch, light touch. Now, reinforce the darks, I'm going to paint the sky. And here's what I was talking about before. If I like the color of the sky the way it is, I want to preserve it, but this has to be a pastel painting, I'm going to find a color and a value of pastel that closely matches what's up in the sky. And that, I whisper it on and allows it to be pastel painting. Oops, and I want to get a little bit duller in here. That color can work together. And then we wanted to have a little bit of a lighter glow at the horizon. Let's add a little bit of a pale pink. Why pale pink? Because I know I'm going to have a lot going on with the red flowers. So we want to have the earth-sky connection happening. All right, so then I'm moving on from the lights. And now what I want to do is reinforce these darks. I am going to have to fix the shape of this tree. It's not very beautiful right now. I need to connect those a little bit more. But I never want to get fixated on one area. And I think that's a problem that I run into and do myself, is I see an area and I say, oh, I don't like that. And I keep going and I keep going. And before I know it, I have not addressed any other part of the painting because I'm just fixated on this one tree, trying to get it right. Where if I had moved away from the one tree, it might very well be that that tree was perfectly fine the way it is, but I couldn't tell because I was so caught up in it. So I'm going to take my own advice and move away from the trees for the moment. Now let's reinforce the dirt in here. And it's basically the same idea. We're going to take some of these warm colors and add it very lightly so these underpainting colors can do a lot of the work. If we have a nice variation in color in the underpainting, and we also have some really interesting drifts and things. If I do a super light touch like this, all that interesting stuff that's under there can remain. It's super important to kind of evaluate the painting and look and see if there's areas that you really want to retain so that you don't totally obliterate. I'm gonna add a little bit of more purple to the dirt here. Something else that I wanted to add. Let's start adding some of the green down in here. This darker green in here. Now, you might be thinking, it's about these close-up flowers, but you haven't even touched them. What are you waiting for? And what I'm waiting for is building up these various layers so that these flowers are actually the decorations. And if I don't have the foundation in place, decorations are going to have nothing to hold on to, and they're just going to kind of fall to the wayside. So I want to make sure that I build that foundation. So I have just one more step. Let's go ahead and put in the green stuff. So lighter, duller, cooler, fuzzier marks in the distant areas. Even though we are up close and personal, I want to create a believable feeling of depth. I want the viewer to feel as though they can like kind of put their hand in here and reach through the flowers and pick something out, or maybe it's a bumblebee buzzing around or an ant crawling up, whatever it is. I want there to be a believable feeling of depth, even when we're up close and personal. So in order to do that, I'm going lighter, duller, cooler, fuzzier in the distance, and then gradually increasing the intensity and the warmth of my greens as I come forward. And light touch over all of this dirt, light touch over all the dirt, so all the dirt can kind of peek through. Warmth coming down. Oh, I didn't put my sun button up there. Let's just do that. That'll become more important in just a minute when I start to turn on the lights on the flowers. So I've got enough green stuff going on. I want to stop before I go too far. I will give it a spray again, light spray. Also, the tree needs some spray. But let's get to those flowers. I'm going to start with the darkest red. These are red poppies. I'm going to start with the darkest red that I have, a dark cool red, and I never draw them and color them in. Instead, I want to use kind of bold, chunky marks and make sure they're not all going in the same direction, and make sure they're not all the same one up here. Make sure they're not the same size. Some of these are going to get buried. We don't want them all to be sitting on the top of the grass, which they are now, but they have to start off on the top of the grass. So I'm starting with a darker, cooler red. And now I need to turn on the lights. I need to make them feel sunlit. And I'm going to do a little test to show you a little trick. I guess you could call it a trick. I want it to feel sunlit, but I'm going to take this guy right here. No, this guy right here. And I want it to feel like it has the sunlight on it. So in my mind, logically, I say, oh, it's sunlit. You need to it's red. You need a lighter value of red. So I'll come in with this nice peachy pink. That's a lighter value of red. So I'm starting to feel like it's got a little bit of a form, right? So maybe, oh, it needs more light. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter. Try to get that three-dimensional feeling to the flower, which it does, but there's something lacking in it. It doesn't feel like warm sunlight on it. So I'm not going to go lighter in value. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this up. I'm going to go warmer and more intense.
Yeah.
Warmer and more intense with my reds.
Karen, I'm sorry, I accidentally muted you. Could you ask someone to turn your voice back on? Karen? Karen?
So I'm going.
Thank you.
We're going warmer and more intense where it's catching the sun. I think I can kick it up another notch though. Let's go even warmer. So I'm going with more of an orange. I've kind of lost my shape on that guy in the sunlit area. And I think we can get it to glow even more if we go even warmer. And basically what we're doing is we're going towards the sun. We're going towards the sun. We're going warmer and more intense, and we're not getting lighter in value. And we're going to do the same thing for the green stuff, because the green stuff, we don't want to, some of these, you know, you want them to be different shapes and sizes, and you know this need to be different shapes and sizes, but your brain puts them in order and makes them all the same shape and size. And it doesn't matter how much you fight that tendency, it happens. So that's something that I have to continuously work on. All right, so they need the centers. They need the dark, put some of that dark in centers, and some of them have it. Not all of them are showing it. There's also some really nice dark seed pod thingies in here. We need to start to build the grasses at the same time. So we tended to our poppies. We turned on the lights. There's this really nice purple flower coming in through here. There's a couple of them. So I'm going to pop those in, add a little bit of that purple to the centers to really make them come alive. But what's happening? They're all floating on top. They're all pasted onto the top of the grasses right now. So we have to address that. And by what we can do, fill this in a little bit more. What we can do is they need stems because they're floating. And then we need to start to bury them. They need to get buried underneath some of the grasses so that they're not all floating. So we're going to start here by putting in some of the stems. And again, broken lines, kind of bury it so that they can feel like they're just dancing and they're not all stiff. And they all have. But when I start to put in some of these stems and grasses, what I want to do is start to build layers and bury some of the flowers. So the more layers that I build, the more depth that I will get with these poppies. I'm starting to pull some of that green stuff in front of some of those poppies. I'm also starting to look and see what other kind of things are in this meadow. Well, there's some chunky leaves. That gives me a different kind of shape, which is interesting. And those leaves are catching the light. So here, let's do it. I feel like I want sunlight on this light, so my instinct tells me to go lighter. That looks like one of those poppy seed pods we don't need. But if I go lighter in value, it doesn't have that sunlit warmth. So I'm going to go, instead of lighter in value, I'm going to go warmer and more intense, like that. And then those little leaves have a feeling of warm sunlight on them instead of just being washed out. Now this works when you're trying to paint warm sunlight. If it's an overcast day, that's a different story. It's just something to keep in mind when you want to paint warm sunlight. So I'm continuously building these layers and adding more detail. But the idea is that I started with big, simple shapes with some interesting things happening because of the watercolor. But I have to really stay on top of the painting because it's very easy at this point to keep going to the point where then everything is all the underpainting gets covered. So this is the part where I have to, again, step back and evaluate what I want to happen. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to those purple things. Oh, I like the blue in there. Oops. And then I'm going to take out, this is the grass box. I didn't introduce you to it. The grass box is just a collection of hard pastels that I like to use for grasses. And then the spice box is just a collection of super soft, so the Sennelier half sticks. And they allow me to come in and really add some of those juicy marks. So I'm going to take the grass box and start to make some of those linear grass marks. So again, I'm building up the depth within the, add some light to the stems. Oops. Add some light to the stems and add some depth and texture. I would at this point perhaps do some more gray so I can get even more texture. Just really depends on how much I want. Now I'm going to start to add some spicy greens. These are those pure intense greens that I used to use for the entire painting, right? And I have learned since that in small amounts, they actually have something to say. But if they're all over the field or the meadow or the green stuff, then it just becomes, it's just too much. It doesn't look natural, right? That's what I'm after. Something that feels natural and believable. And I'm only going to put these things where I want the viewer to look, where I want the viewer to look. I'm always thinking about the viewer. I'm going to add a little bit more orange and change the shape of this guy a little bit better. This is the super soft, so I can really come in and shout with these marks. Those won't be getting light. Maybe this might get just a touch of light in there. I like that this purple needs to have a little more variation, these purple flowers. Well, maybe it needs another one over here. And then a little bit more. Let's do this. Let's take the Terry Ledwig eggplant and add just a little bit more detail with that little furry stuff that we have in the interior of the poppies. But it's really just a matter of gradually adding detail, but staying focused so that we don't totally cover everything up. And that's the easiest thing to do, I think, in painting. So stepping back, taking out the punch list, taking out the dry erase board so that I can write down the things that I want to fix or address will keep me in control. And occasionally looking at the photo, not really overly focused on the photo, but occasionally looking at the photo will give me ideas. Like, for example, there's some interesting dark things down here. Again, anytime I add another layer, I get a little bit more depth within these grasses. The last thing that I'm going to do, and I'll do it occasionally in the painting, but I want to do it just to show you guys how much fun it is. We can have, I do want to do something here. We can have a little bit of life. Let's add a little bit of life to the painting. And then we'll call it finished. And I remember when we're all on this walk, right, and we settled down for our picnic, and what is the one thing that might cause us to have to move? Well, rain. What else? Yes. Ants. Yeah, let's do some bees. We can't really enjoy the picnic with too many bees, so we'll just poke in a few bees. And these just come right at the end. They're just buzzing around, you know. They're good, but not when you're trying to have a picnic. Give them a little wings, like so. Well, but I'm gonna stop. But I wanted to share with you two different approaches. It's been a pleasure to share with you. Okay. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have for me. No?
Yeah, at what point do you decide whether it's gonna be an abstract painting or a regular painting? Is that like a midway thing?
Yeah, well, I'm a midway person now, because I don't know if you're familiar with what I've been doing lately, but it's been more abstract. And so I'm finding that no matter what I do, I'm leaning in that direction, being more expressive, being good when I'm doing the representation. I can't help it, right? You can't change yourself.